Hello and welcome to another episode of the Carmudgeon Show podcast. My name is Jason Cammisa. That is a Derek Tam-Scott.
And we will bring you maximum uplifting this week.
Not at all.
Just kidding.
Hope you're taking your SSRIs, kids, because it's going to be a long, depressing look at import tariffs.
Yes, but if you're not importing cars, then it won't
but it does.
Stress. Oh, yes. I was doing the setup there for you. It could potentially affect you, even if you're not importing cars, unfortunately. Yeah, it's for reasons that we will discuss shortly.
Right. The car market, the used car and collector car market is in a bit of rough waters right now with a ton of volatility.
Unless in between the 3-4 days between which we recorded this and when you are consuming it or later, the federal government has decided to alter course, which is entirely feasible.
It could happen 60 or 70 times between that. I think the government is changing its mind at a rate of something of 50 or 60 hertz.
Yes. Cycles per second.
60 hertz here because, you know, the rest of the world. Yes,
because we use 3 cycle 60 hertz electricity in the
rest of the world, they use that crappy 50 hertz stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway.
More is better.
Yes,
America. America first.
Stop it. This will not devolve into a political discussion. We will talk about economics, but not politics.
Okay.
But only really briefly about economics, because really we just want to talk about cars. So.
Yes. Okay. Well, all that and more after the jingle that is the Carmudgeon jingle and the clap of Derek.
Not bad.
Thank you. I drove something recently that was turbocharged that I had expectations of shitness for, and it was actually surprisingly good. So it's a 1980s turbocharged carbureted car. Yes.
Is it Japanese or American?
Neither of the above.
Italian?
Nope.
Fuck. Swedish?
Nope.
British?
Yes.
British carbureted. Turbocharged, early 80s.
Yes. Although it was produced in this form, I think, until 86 or 7. At least until 85 for sure.
How many cylinders?
4.
Oh, a Lotus.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. So it's Lotus Esprit Turbo.
Yes. First year for the U.S. market, Turbo Esprit.
Can I just point out that was pretty good that I got that.
Yes, it only took 740. Is it bigger than a bread box? Is it designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro?
Yeah, exactly. That's still pretty obscure. Okay.
Is the company start with an L and does it rhyme with Otis?
Yeah. Is that where Otis?
It is not.
Otis and Company comes. Okay.
It is not.
I quite like 80s turbocharged cars. I don't know. I should say that. I actually prefer the driving experience of 80s turbocharged cars to modern turbocharged cars because they're so outspokenly turbocharged and you can hear what's happening.
Yes.
And where modern stuff tends to try to emulate NA cars in getting response as quickly as possible. And so you get nothing, thwomp, and the turbos hit really, really hard and upset the chassis. And I'm an old man.
The Esprit, when they were engineering it, they wanted it to have a lot better response because when they benchmarked other turbocharged cars, which were like the BMW 2002 Turbo and the Porsche 930 and the Saab 99 Turbo, they were like, this is totally unacceptable. We cannot put a car in production like this. And so they said, let's run pretty light boost pressure. I forget what it was, like 6 or 7 or 8 pounds of boost, fairly high compression ratio. The other thing was, like, obviously mixture management was very difficult with carburetors.
Right.
And so they wanted to run relatively light boost and a small turbo to get the thing to be responsive. And it is actually, as turbocharged cars of that era go, impressively responsive, which is to say you get something within a second instead of within like 3 seconds.
That's not bad.
So that was an interesting...
Or 30 seconds in the case of a Porsche 930.
Yeah.
So we talked about this on the podcast, but I drove that W124 300E with a Mosselman twin turbo setup, and that is the single best turbocharged application I've ever driven. Other than when you get to the modern stuff with torque fill.
Yes.
Where your Capri spool the turbo.
So it's better than like a 3-liter 990 1.2?
Oh, yeah. Which is actually a really good engine in terms of turbo response. But this genuinely felt naturally aspirated. Even at like 1,000 RPM, remember, it's 3 liters of displacement. with 2 turbos on it. So each turbo is only dealing with 3 cylinders and 1.5 liters. Not a lot of displacement, not a lot of air. And the turbos were tiny, literally this big, and ran 7.8, I think, pounds of boost. And they just built it just felt like a fuel injection system that wasn't immediate and responsive, or like, a delayed throttle. It was amazing.
Reading about the way Lotus did it, I thought was super interesting, where they said, look, it's all about the volume of air you have to accelerate. And so they were like, we put everything really close to the carburetors so that there's it's just this very small minimized volume and like a small intake manifold. So there's not a lot of air in there that has to be accelerated. There's a whole bunch of clever stuff. I mean, this reflects Lotus Engineering's sort of like engineering consultancy business, where they're really used to being clever. I mean, of course, turbocharging, or rather, carburation is a kludged together solution. But I think Bosch quoted them 3 years to develop something, and they're like, "Oh, well, fuck off. We'll figure something else out," which they did, and they did a pretty good job of it. So I was impressed by that experience. Anyway, that's not what we set out to talk about.
No, we were going to start out with me bitching about a lawsuit. I just want to take the audience's pulse on this one thing. Mm-hmm. I think, as a fan of Volkswagen and the owner of a lot of Volkswagen products, I think I want to start a class action lawsuit against VW. And not for...
When you say stuff like that, you have to mean it. So I guess the question now is, do you mean that?
Okay.
And or do you want someone else to start it so that you can join it?
Oh, I would totally... No. I mean, the whole point of a class action, you hire some, bloodthirsty lawyer who goes out and does
works on a contingency basis.
But I really do think I'm owed something by VW. And I think all owners of Mark 7 cars...
Yes, you endlessly fillet them, as you say. So I imagine that unless you're willing to work for free.
What I'm talking about. For free. You can give it away, Derek, but you can't charge. That's illegal.
Oh, so sorry.
So yeah.
So a lawsuit.
So let me explain what happens, because I think this is kind of important, and I'm curious to see what the audience thinks. Right? I'm not litigious. I've never sued anyone. I hope to never be sued or sue anyone. But and I don't think this is particularly Karen-y. When you buy a Mark 7 Volkswagen new, you were given a number of features.
When you did buy.
When I had bought.
You can
one of the features that is included in that car is internet connectivity. And in the case of the e-Golf, internet connectivity for the car, and it's Volkswagen's product called CarNet, which was incredibly poorly done, but still worked most of the time.
And creatively named.
And incredibly creatively named. And it did certain little things like allow you to lock and unlock the doors remotely with the app, which seems like a small thing until you're going to the club. That's a nightclub or a discotheque for people of your generation.
A discotheque.
A discotheque.
Yes. Okay. I've heard of those.
And you can leave your cellular telephone in your pocket, but leave your car keys locked in the car. And so I enjoyed that feature. You can also see where you parked for those episodes where you're coming out of the club at 2:00 in the morning and don't remember where the hell your car is, or it got towed and you can see where it is on the map. It also has break-in alerts and for me, the most important thing with the e-Golf was you can manage charging. You could tell it to start or stop. And
preheat.
You can preheat the cabin while on mains electricity. So there's a feature there that you're not using the battery
range.
So you're getting in the car, and that car specifically doesn't have a climate control system that's different from the gas-burning Mark 7 Golfs. It just has a small coolant reservoir and a 5 kilowatt heater, and it circulates this coolant through that system so that it can use the regular climate control. It's wasteful because of how it's done. It's not heating the air directly. And heating all of that coolant up takes time and energy.
Hashtag compliance car annoyances.
Yeah, listen, I understand why Volkswagen did it that way.
They don't want to dedicate.
In Europe, they did, where they probably didn't lose tens of thousands of dollars on each one of these cars. They did put a heat pump in, which was a better, much more efficient solution. But neither here nor there. That feature totally went away, as did the automatic, calling 911, sort of OnStar-y kind of thing. When AT&T sunsetted its 3G cellular network.
3G. Ooh, wow.
Yeah. And
that's so very retro.
At the time, VW gave us all notice, like, hey, here's some notice that your car is going to be losing a feature. We're working on it.
A feature.
A bunch of features, some of which are really kind of important.
Yeah, the like OnStar or whatever they call it equivalent in terms of accident notification actually has like a meaningful safety implication.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I got the notice, and I was just about to pay for the service because the service was included for X amount of time while my car was under warranty for charging purposes.
And that's a 4-year, 50,000-mile warranty.
I think this was 336 this
that's
year.
That's right. They
bumper.
went after they started in 19. They switched to 450, I think, or even longer, or 672.
It was
there was some really outrageously long warranty period that they added for a year because as a sort of hangover or repentance for Dieselgate.
Yeah. My car's got 10-year, 100,000 powertrain warranty, or whatever it is. But more importantly, they took away a substantive feature. And so they said they were going to be working on it.
That was included in the car and was part of the car when you paid for it, when you bought it new.
While the car was still under warranty. And I think that's a key point, right? So this is still a new car. The car was 2 years old when this happened. And so they sent a letter, we're going to work on it. And then I got a follow-up letter saying, hey, electric-powered cars, never getting an update. Fuck off.
Kindly fuck off.
Kindly fuck off.
Sincerely.
Gas-powered cars, like my mom's car that I bought for her, which I would love to have this sort of feature on, they were working on a solution. And this would be now my niece's GTI, which is also a 17, my mom's Golf, all of these cars. Well, they just sent a letter to a friend of mine who also has one of these cars. And it says, in early 2022, we informed you of AT&T's decision to sunset its 3G network, resulting in the loss of connectivity of the CarNet telematics system in your GTI. In addition, we communicated our hope to be able to offer a technical solution that would restore your vehicle's connectivity, including as many CarNet features as possible. And they were going to charge for this, but which I think
if you wanted it,
if
then
you
wanted
could. Right. I think that was bullshit, frankly, that they were going to charge for it, but whatever. After several years of effort, we have concluded there is no permanent technical solution that meets all our stringent safety and security requirements and would offer the value we consistently strive to provide. This means if you're subscribed to CarNet prior to the 3G sunset and network sunset, we are unable to restore your connected vehicle service, including your CarNet emergency assistance, anti-theft alerts, and automatic crash notifications. This is not the outcome we'd hoped for. Please know that your safety, security, and satisfaction is our priority. Except it's not. Except it's actually not. Mm-hmm. So I just sort of wonder, I think a company removing functionality from a product that you paid for should be compensated with some sort of, like, you either fix, like, first of all, imagine Tesla saying, oh yeah, we don't care. All of those cars.
Can you please choose a different car company?
Okay, the only one I know about though is Tesla. And when they sunsetted those things, they said, bring your car in and we will just upgrade the modem for free. It was a 10-minute fix. It was done. And the Teslas continued to function. I'm sorry, Volkswagen, if you want to fancy yourself a tech company and a modern car, like whatever, you need to play by the fucking rules. And all of a sudden your iPhone doesn't work anymore while it's still under warranty, and it's like 3 days old. Tough. I just don't. I think there should be a class action lawsuit against Volkswagen of America to reimburse all of us for some value of what that feature should be worth, and could be
especially
worth.
If they were willing to charge for it previously. Then that tells you that they thought it had value.
Ooh, you should be a lawyer. Anyway, so discuss that in the comments below, please.
Okay.
That is also
this is Jason stirring the pot.
I'm just curious. Maybe the audience will feel that I'm being Karen-esque, and it's not a big deal.
I think it's important to note that this feature was originally included in the car when you bought it and was listed as a benefit to, this potential selling point to people, as opposed to like being signposted from the beginning, like the subscription heated seats for BMWs or whomever else. Like, they were clear at the beginning how it was going to work, as opposed to the old bait and switch or the failure to, breach of some contract where they're obliged to provide a list of features and functionality. By the same way that other types of class action lawsuits happen, where like Mercedes had this thing where their Mars red paint would fail, like the clear coat would just completely peel off, and there was some big class action suit about that. Like, there's some baseline expectations about what the car should do, and that was determined to be outside of them. And I think probably this is too, especially if it's listed as included.
And paint is sort of, you understand that paint will fade in the sun and whatever else. I think the idea.
Yeah, but there's a certain timeline under which we expect such things to happen, and it's not like 3 years and specific to a certain color, where all other colors don't do that in the same environment.
And all of competitor vehicles. And,
correct.
The expectation is that during the warranty period or the first 5 or 7 years of your car's life, all of the substantive safety features that it came with will continue to
And
operate.
convenience features too.
Convenience also, yeah. But the safety thing is...
I don't think this is frivolous. Maybe some other things that have ever happened have been frivolous, but this doesn't feel frivolous to me as a human. I don't know.
I don't know what I want out of this. I mean, I certainly want an apology.
$9.99 a month.
What I want them to do is fix the fucking problem.
Yeah.
Or just say, you know what, we can't do the 3G thing, but we allow you to pair a phone to it and leave it in the car. So Bluetooth it, or it's capable of Wi-Fi. So for example, at least when my car's at home, if it can connect to my Wi-Fi, then I can connect to it and see battery status, charging status, and turn that kind of stuff on.
Yeah.
And by the way,
still do the preheating thing.
there is no way to do the preheating thing on the car directly. That's the other thing. It's not like I can walk outside in the freezing cold Northern California winters.
Yes, it might
degrees.
be 51
No,
degrees.
I have plenty of times where there's ice all over the car in the morning, but it's not like I can walk out, hit a button, and have it start the process. It can't do that. So I've lost the ability to preheat the cabin without it running anyway. That is certainly a third world problem.
Third world problem. Is that what
meaning,
you said?
Yeah, meaning doesn't even reach the level of,
I thought third world problem is like shelter and food.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, okay, so other way around.
So it's like a zeroth world problem.
It's
above first world.
It's above first, yeah.
Okay.
0.8th world problem. Anyway.
Right.
You wanted to congratulate me on the sale of my 850
I did
CSI.
not. Many other people did, but I did not because I immediately looked at it and saw that it was not your car.
Yeah. So last week, a Euro spec 34,000 kilometer 850 CSI that looks very much like mine, same color combo, sold on Bring a Trailer for $211,000 plus fee. So what, $216?
It's $7,500 now.
Oh, okay.
So 218 and a half?
218 and a half. I did not have a $218,500 day yesterday. But nor am I surprised at that value. So the highest transaction ever for a CSI on Bring a Trailer was $266,000 plus fee. And I think this car was nicer.
So the market's gone down.
Oh, the market has definitely gone down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I promise you I was aware of this generally as a person whose job it is to follow the market.
Yeah. So that I think was that sort of gives us now the perfect excuse to talk about a market update.
Yes.
Because shit's all over the place.
It's a little wacky right now. There's a lot of stuff happening right now that's changing the car market, and there's a lot more that's around the corner. I am, of course, most proximately talking about the tariffs, which today is Monday the 31st, if Monday is the 31st.
Well, the day that they're seeing this?
Yes. Dear viewers, are consuming this on Monday the 31st on April.
Or later.
Or later. Mm-hmm. Certainly not prior.
Maybe. Maybe I'll set it to launch on Sunday.
Just to make me wrong. Great. Splendid. Sure. So April 2nd, our dear glorious leader, sorry, we're not using that type of terminology yet.
You are not going to be.
I thought
this is not a political show.
This country. I thought at some point we would have to start calling him that. Is that not yet happened?
That could happen.
Yes. Anyway, the president of the United States has introduced tariffs because it's one of the few things that the president can do directly by executive order, as opposed to passing through Congress. And so this is one of the levers which he can pull, which he is delighted to pull by introducing 25% tariffs on cars. There's a lot of lack of clarity at this moment about what that includes. Obviously it includes new cars. This is like a continuation of the chicken tax, which we've talked about before. There is an existing 25% tariff on trucks, which has been in effect since 1964 and is oriented towards protecting the United States truck market. And then historically, the car rate has been 2.5% instead of 25%. Well, as of April 2nd, unless this has changed in the intervening days, which is entirely possible, because we're recording this last week, at the end of last week. It's Thursday today.
So we have 5 days.
So we have 5 days in which things could change, in which case this could all be complete bunk and moot and irrelevant, in which case you'll still...
I don't think it's moot or irrelevant. So I think listen, we can discuss the merits of tariffs. We can discuss.
I would love to actually have Ronald Reagan do that, because there's this great clip of video of him talking about the effects of tariffs. We may even include an insert of it.
If you'd like to get that political.
Yeah. I mean, no, well, it's not political. It's just a
it's
historical
economic.
discussion by a former president about his view about tariffs.
You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
I think the bigger
Former
issue,
Republican president, it should be added.
So I think the bigger issue, if this whole thing does go away in the next 5 days before this launches, is there's the question has been on my mind whether the U.S. government is using the tariff discussion, is actually planning on instituting the tariffs as part of an economic plan, or is using this as leverage in negotiations with other countries.
Yes, and that has been
was a
a
Freudian
strategy we
slip.
have observed. Correct, it is a Freudian slip because we are now treating countries
constitutional law like an employee handbook
corporation,
that's
yes.
changeable. Yeah.
It's an employee handbook that is changeable. Wow. Okay, so this is getting.
That's just a fact, right? I mean,
Yes,
whether
sure.
you like the government or not, it's right now things are being done. Things are being done that you can definitely argue need to be done, and you could definitely argue it shouldn't be done. But there's I don't think there's a chance of disagreement that the Trump administration is really pushing the limits of what's possible, and all of the thousands of lawsuits that have been followed are there as part of the check and balances system. That's how this country was sort of designed to operate.
Sure.
And the tariffs one, I did think for a while was a negotiation tactic, especially
Yes,
with
because we
Canada.
have certainly, and that has proven to be the case in the case of Canada and Mexico, where the negotiation, there was a 1 month per reprieve when the country in question, bent, basically, submitted. And that situation is obviously clear. In this situation, it's a little bit less clear who the adversary is, who is meant to bend. And this is a car podcast, and so I don't know that we necessarily need to add too much color there, but there is some obvious discussion, and in discussing this with a person who is a Trump supporter, I said, what is your view of what the mission is here? And he said, I believe it's a bluff. I believe this is a tactic to try and exert force. And I said, against whom, unclear. But this appears to be some sort of tactic to exert force of one kind or another.
Right. So, and the prima facie goal of a tariff, I mean, that which is on its face, is to help encourage the domestic economy by encouraging companies to produce their stuff here rather than import it. I think the clip that you're referring to from Reagan talks about how that may help short term, but ultimately tends to hurt long term.
Yes, reduces consumer choice, et cetera.
But I think the bigger issue here is the unclarity. First of all, the sort of waffling back and forth is one thing, but the lack of clarity. It was my understanding before you texted me last night in a tizzy about
we'll get to that in a minute.
Over this whole thing, that this was a tariff that was to be placed on new cars produced outside of the U.S. and then imported.
Correct.
But it doesn't. And ChatGPT was like, I don't know. I mean, that was its answer.
And the language does say all cars. And then it was later clarified the following evening, Wednesday evening, that also it includes parts. Because immediately in this, you start to think about, perhaps we've talked about this before, where Mercedes-Benz, when they used to bring Sprinters over, if it was a passenger van, it was not categorized as a truck, and so it would be taxed, 2.5%. Rather than 25%. And so Mercedes-Benz and I think Ford also used to bring passenger or cargo vans with seats over, and they would come in as passenger vans. They would then remove the seats, ship them back to the factory where it was produced in Germany in the case of Mercedes. I think Ford was making some in Turkey, probably some in England or something too, and probably continental Europe. And then the seats would just flow back and forth in container ships across the Atlantic being recycled to get around that. And now, I think Ford got slapped with a substantial fine because of this, and they probably make them here now. And Mercedes opened a facility in one of them Carolina states where they make Sprinters now, or at least assemble Sprinters from complete knockdown kits. I don't know how they make them, but in any case, their final assembly point is now definitively in the United States, as opposed to this whole workaround situation.
The Sprinter thing was amazing because it was the Sprinters where they not only would pull the seats back out, send it back to Germany, and put them in another car for that trip, but also they had to remove the glass. So as a passenger van, it had to have windows. So they had windows in the van. They would remove the glass, put it in the container with the seats, send it back to Germany, and weld in steel panels and then repaint it. All to get around this 10x
because that's
tax.
still cheaper than 22.5%, the delta, 22.5%.
And I just failed to see how that's helping anyone.
Correct. Yes. And so now, all these people are saying, well, okay, parts are taxed too, and so that eliminates the loophole where people are like, well, I will take the engine out of it and send that separately, and it's not a complete car, and blah blah blah. So the dust is very much not settled, and just the fact that they had to clarify after the announcement indicates that they weren't super clear. And then in our particular case, we had a car, in excess of $3 million car that was scheduled to fly on 4/2, and the language is it goes into effect on 4/2. And so we were like, I'm not really sure what to do with this. My understanding, from talking to the importers was that as long as it is dispatched by 4/2, it's okay. And then we calculated the difference in duty, and it was in excess of $700,000 increase in duty. So we're
it's a lot of shit.
Our company, my company is quite anxious about 4/2, and then there was some language on the actual White House website that said as enters after 12:01 a.m. on 4/3 Eastern Daylight Time, and
oh my God.
There's also apparently the car can. This is all a level of detail I've never needed to know before, because you bring the car over and it doesn't matter. It arrives when it arrives. You pay the duty when it gets here, or after, or before, or whenever you want. But apparently you can clear customs as soon as the plane lifts off, and it's like, okay, is the plane lifting off on 4/2, Eastern time, or is it 4/1? We did the math; it was still 4/2, and so I quite literally jumped through my own asshole yesterday. It was quite the contortion to get the car onto an earlier flight, which I was really surprised I was able to do, because there's a lot of people who are in the same boat and freaking out. And I know so many people right now who are like, I'm just trying to get the car in before 4/3 or 4/2 or whatever the day is. But we did get the car on an earlier flight. So that was a huge relief, but it was an extremely stressful experience.
Well, there's $750,000 at stake.
Well, and it's still not entirely clear whether it includes old cars. The language, if you read it literally, seems to imply that it does include old cars. I've heard that it doesn't include old cars, which is probably people wishfully thinking. I agree. I mean, if your goal is to protect manufacturing in the United States, then how does including old cars in this
is anything importable subject to 25% duty? Used old in this country? It would be very strange.
Trucks, probably, maybe trucks. Or maybe if it's a used truck, I don't know. Actually, I've never imported an old truck. I suspect it's probably not.
I think we did, when we were talking about the Rover, hold on, don't we have a friend who imported like a Defender or something from Canada or something I was worried about?
I don't know.
Whatever. To me, the idea of a 25% import tariff on something old accomplishes nothing.
Yeah. Other than it hobbles, it makes money for the government, and it hobbles people whose livelihood is associated with the movement of old cars around the world, like dealers, the transporters, and enthusiasts and collectors who want more choice.
The counter argument in your case is going to be, well, if somebody can afford a $3 million car, then tough shit,
yes,
right?
They can afford.
There's the sort of eat the rich side of that.
Yes, but it does. You have to look at the downstream impacts on the rest of. There's an entire industry built around this that is not composed of the super rich. People like me who are just trading cars, or the people who.
To be clear, this is a car that you don't own. This is a car that you're representing.
I'm bringing for a client.
Right.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. And all the transporters who make their livelihoods importing and exporting cars, customs brokers, and the carriers themselves, and sort of just the benefits of global trade.
Well, and then trickling down to the restoration shops and the mechanics and all that stuff. Right.
Everybody who is involved, and So this was, it seems half-baked to include old cars in this, and from my perspective, and it may not, and it may be amended, or who the heck knows. There's a lot of stuff to be confirmed still, and does it include race cars or not? Race cars historically have been, in some sort of taxation schemes, been treated separately from road cars as well. And obviously some of these cars are race cars that this would impact. And so, the question of what is the market doing? This is all a lead into this general market discussion, which is to say the market is a little bit uncertain and variable. I mean, the long-term effects of this scheme would be quite substantial. I think it would. And you see this in certain countries. Like, for example, Switzerland is in the middle geographically. It is surrounded on all sides by the EU. And so you end up with a very insular market in Switzerland. And Switzerland is famously xenophobic in the, we keep to ourselves, and sort of the border really means something there, whereas the goal in most of the EU has been to make the border become decreasingly material as a barrier to commerce and the flow of humans and goods and all of that stuff. So Switzerland has a unique car market because it is not part of the EU. And so they're historically very restrictive about registering cars there that were not originally sold in Switzerland, and it has its own sort of insular market, and values are quite different of cars in Switzerland, even from 5 miles across the border in Italy or wherever else, because as a Swiss national, you basically have to be willing to pay a substantial duty, and I don't know what the number is, but I'm sure it's above 20% or around 20%. And so it has its own market, and that's what would happen to the United States. Historically, we've enjoyed one of the lowest duty rates in the world of 2.5% for old cars, which means that oftentimes, if you're a Swiss person and you have a car, you want to sell it to a European, you actually have a better chance of selling a Swiss car to the United States than to a European, or vice versa. Like, as a Swiss person, you'd rather, as a person with a car in Switzerland that you want to sell internationally, you're more likely to sell it to an American than you are to an Italian who is across the street, practically.
Because the import duty.
Because the duty
Italy.
here, yes. Yeah, and the treatment or the barrier between Switzerland and the EU. And so, the U.S. has been able to access, American consumers have been able to access cars, and this applies in virtually any country. Obviously there's a substantial amount of Japanese cars that get imported here, and from wherever cars may exist. And so Americans have been able to absorb a lot of cars that were sort of had a duty problem. And what will happen at sort of really high level car deals, and like this happened with an F50 deal that we were involved with, was that the car sits in a warehouse, which is a bonded warehouse, and the car cannot leave that warehouse, and it is not imported technically into that country, even though it's physically in that country. It cannot leave that warehouse, and the moment it does, then duty becomes due. And so the car could be sitting in there for months for whatever reason, because somebody doesn't want to pay the duty, or they're trying to sell it, or whatever. We as Americans have been there to pick up the pieces, because we'll say, yeah, we'll take that at 2.5%, and then it solves you the problem of 17% or whatever these specific, every country in the EU, and based on the age of the car, if it's more or less than 30 years, it varies. And so we as Americans have been able to sort of pick up the untouchable cars to a lot of other markets, and it has allowed American consumers to get cars at attractive numbers, because you say, well, look, if it's, as long as it's less than 17% less, I would take a 10% haircut on what this car could otherwise sell for, if it means that I can sell it to an American who pays 2.5% duty instead of 17 or 20 or whatever it is % duty. So there have been benefits for enthusiasts. Admittedly, you have to be the type of enthusiast who has the scratch to import a car, but people bring over
the Honda Beat
imported cars.
Right, I didn't import that; it was already here when I got it.
Yes, but somebody did.
Somebody did, and I think they paid something on the order of $5,000 for the car. Not even that; it was less than that.
Sure.
In Japan, I found up the auction receipts for it. But you're still talking on. Let's say the car was worth $4,000 when it was shipped over. It's an additional $1,000, and that's still actual money.
Yes. And I mean, even if you were, say, because the cost of bringing a car over in a container is, call it $5,000 to $10,000, depending where it's coming from. And if you do roll on, roll off. So normally expensive cars are shipped one of expensive cars are shipped one of two ways, which is in a 40-foot or 20-foot container, which just goes onto a container ship. And it's the kind of container you see on the back of a semi or a lorry if you're elsewhere. Or it gets air freighted. And then if it's a less expensive car, you're more incentivized to do what's called roll-on, roll-off. And roll-on, roll-off it's like a big parking garage of a boat, and that's how like almost all new cars are sold. Porsches, for example, right? It's a big parking garage. Some person in there, probably dozens of people in a port are just driving thousands of cars into a boat, and then the same thing happens when it arrives, as opposed to it getting at a freight forwarder's warehouse. We're getting all into the import process here. At a freight forwarder's warehouse, you drop the car off, and then they pack it inside of a container with another car if it's a 40-foot container, or by itself if it's a 20-foot container. And it gets strapped down, and materials get put around it, and it gets secured properly inside the container at a warehouse that's hopefully close to a port. Then it gets put on a semi that brings it to the port, and then it gets loaded onto a ship, and then the exact opposite of that happens once it gets here if it's containerized. So Ro-Ro, as it's called, roll-on, roll-off, is cheaper, but
Way
there's
cheaper.
people like, driving your car. And if it's a wacky car, if it doesn't run, then, imagine some unknown person at a port driving your car, you're like, ugh.
So when I brought the E30 in, I Ro-Ro'd it, but I pulled the fuel pump relay.
So they had to push it? Mm-hmm. Oh, they must have loved that.
Yeah, you're not driving the car. Sorry.
Yes.
But then when I did the Mercedes, so the Scirocco, this was back in 2012. Funny, I just ran a Carfax on the Scirocco to see it, and it shows it was exported from Oakland and then imported 3 months later to Oakland. It's the bizarrest thing to see on a Carfax. But the Scirocco went out on its own in a 20-foot container and then came back with my Cosworth 190 together in a 40.
Which you had just purchased in
Which
Germany.
I had purchased over there. I will say, had there been a 25% duty instead of a 2.5, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have bought that car. It wouldn't have been worth it.
Yes.
But that one, the funny thing is, so I've done it both ways, and one of the cars got damaged, and it was the fucking Mercedes in the Ro-Ro. When they were strapping it down.
Mercedes in the container.
In the container. I'm sorry, not Ro-Ro. Yeah, the E30 was fine in Ro-Ro. Pulled off, looked absolutely fine. Put the thing back in, started and drove away.
Yeah.
But stuff can happen anyway. But yeah,
yes,
containers are much more expensive
than Ro-Ro.
3 times the price.
Yeah, I would say that a shared container right now coming from the port of Rotterdam, which is one of the big ports, is about $7,500
to the West Coast.
To the West Coast.
Right.
That's coming through the Panama Canal, so it's going to take
may
quite
be
a long
close to us
trip.
at any moment.
Sure. Yes, if we
unless we
antagonize,
just take it,
or we annex. We built this thing in the first place. It was always ours, or some nonsense like that. And so, it's about $7,500 to bring. It's cheaper to go to Europe because there's less demand for it because of the tax rates. And so, a container to Europe might be like half or less than that. But $7,500 or so to come to the West Coast for us anyway. And I'm sure it's less if you're going to the East Coast.
About half that, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Last time I looked.
Yeah, but I've run the numbers before, and now transporting on a truck across the country is quite
expensive.
$2,500 enclosed. And then if you're doing air freight from Europe, it's variable, and it really depends on what level of service and availability and whether they have slots they're trying to fill. But or
how high
it's
the car is.
or how tall the car is, right? There's a different rate. So ironically, like a lot of the exotic cars that are low are cheaper to ship because they're not as tall. And so if you're on the lower deck, because there's only certain quantity of cars or types of cars they can put on the lower deck. Usually these are 747s, 747-400s, or 8Fs, 8 freighters. Because they have the big nose door that folds up, which a passenger car does. The passenger plane doesn't, but then they get converted after they're retired by airlines. Anyway, so it's cheaper to do a lower deck car, which would be, your Countach's and F40s and Scirocco's.
Scirocco's 2,300 pounds and low. It was so cheap to air freight. It was barely.
You air freighted it?
I didn't, but we looked into it.
Yeah.
Just for timing. When this is for the story for automobile, we looked in it for timing. We didn't need to, so we didn't do it. As it turns out, the ship got delayed by a hurricane, and so I was supposed to have 3 weeks with my car in Germany, and I had 3 days.
Yeah.
So air freighting it over would have been a saving, but it wasn't that much more because the car's so light and so low.
Yes.
That it was
yeah,
lower.
because airplanes
deck.
you pay per pound. Much more so. Weight is much more important when you're flying than when you're in a ship.
But you can usually do for $10,000 one way.
10 is on the light side now, and 20 for the lower deck, and 25,000 is possible. During COVID, all sorts of wacky stuff was happening. I heard noises about people paying $100,000 for air freight at that time. I did get a quote from Japan about a year ago, and it was 60 or 50,000 to come over for a low car.
The crazy thing to me was at that time when I did remember a 20-foot over and a 40-foot back with 2 cars in it. The total round trip fare for that whole thing through COSDIL, which is the sort of official international transporter.
It's a high-end transporter for like cars that are coming to Pebble Beach, for example.
The total bill for that was
because they're owned by the same
was less than my business class ticket to Europe and back to do that, which was paid for by Ferrari because I was going to drive 599 GTO. And I'll never forget that just to get my fat ass over there and back was less expensive than...
It's the caviar. No, I know. You're not going to be drinking champagne and you're not going to be eating caviar.
I'm not. It's all wasted on me.
So you're a high profit margin customer. They like you because you're not consuming enough champagne or caviar.
I just want to sleep so I can land and work. Anyway.
Yes.
All right, so shipping, we're done.
So yes, we discussed the mechanics. Anyway, so all that to say that if you are, bringing over a $10,000 car or a $30,000 car, or sort of these more accessible price points that more consumers will be bringing cars over, the duty is impactful.
Yeah.
I mean, because it would go from $1,000 or something like that if the car is, let's see, have I done that? Oh gosh, what is that, $40,000? On a $40,000 car, $1,000 of duty as opposed to $10,000 of duty.
So it's $9,000 additional to your local government.
To your federal government.
Your local person who's standing there with a handout.
Oh yes.
I'm not a fan of tariffs. I don't have an economics degree, but I don't believe they work long term.
So the reason why I was talking about the Swiss market and how it's unique is that given the high duty rates that are now going to be in effect for old cars, assuming that is indeed what ends up happening, the U.S. market is going to become insular. It's going to become individual. There's not going to be a lot of cars flowing across that, and it's going to change the values of cars that are already here in a big way that historically we have been free of, and it's been really enjoyable. I don't know, one of my favorite idle activities, because I am just completely wackadoodle, is to look at classifieds of cars that are for sale in Europe, because there's all sorts of weird stuff over there that you can't find here. And I fantasize, and sometimes not fantasize, but actually execute, bringing cars in from overseas. And so, you'll that freedom to bring interesting things that we never got here is going to end as a result of this. And the cars that are here, whatever of them exist, if there are any, I think I've said before that one of my cars that I really would like to do this with is a Fiat 130 sedan. A great Fiat 130 sedan's 20,000 euros. Now I would be less inclined to bring one over if given what the duty rates are doing. And so the market here is going to change. And you're going to see a value gap appear that did not historically exist for cars that are here already versus cars that aren't. And that gap, the trend of prices is not going to be down. Those cars will become more valuable here. So if you own one already, it's good for you. But if you are interested in sort of transacting them or bringing them in and out of the country, it's going to limit choices. And so we're working on a deal for an old car that even more expensive than the $3 million, and that deal has just completely ceased to be viable any longer.
This is what I worry about, is that the uncertainty of what is coming, what's been bluster, what's strong arm tactics, what's going to stick, what's going to change, all of that will just depress not only prices, ultimately prices, but everyone's willingness to transact anything, houses, correct. Anything. I mean, right now we're just in a period of uncertainty to the point where we don't know.
There's a lot of wait and see.
What the rules are
for sure
going to be,
and that is also applying. I mean, to the stock market. The stock market is now presently, I think, right around where it was around the time of the election, and so all of that post-election boost has been returned to the ether, or the people who shorted, or whatever it is, so we now the car market is reacting to that, and so we are now a month after the Florida auctions, which are one of the big primary bellwethers for especially European cars transacting in the U.S. There's 3 of them, basically 3 times a year. A meaningful number of these high-end cars transact. That's in January at Scottsdale, March and February in Florida, and then
At the Amelia.
Yes, at the Amelia, and also in Miami, because there's now sales in Miami, so within a week, and at Monterey Car Week. And so you could start to see the impacts of this in Florida, where most cars, I would say, that did so below their low estimates or just inside of the low estimates. There are a few exceptions, and this is always the rule, which I will come back to, which is that extraordinary, unrepeatable stuff always does magical numbers, and if you have people who have deep enough pockets who just have to have it, then they will do insane things. And this happens with all sorts of cars at all price points. If something's really magical and unrepeatable, like we did this with a Lotus Esprit that we sold, it has to have been the best Series 1 Esprit in the world, and it sold for an insane number because it was really hard to repeat that car. And so numbers that are outrageous, where you're like, holy shit, will continue to happen. But if we go back to 2022, that was very routine because everybody just wanted a piece of the action. Everybody had money, and money was cheap, and blah blah blah. And so that was happening very frequently. Like you would just every result, like very few no sales on Bring a Trailer or anywhere else in that period. And every time you'd see something sell, you'd just be like, that's an insane number that makes my eyes water. And now
you were
that
pissed
happens,
off at the time. You were
I
frustrated.
mean, I knew that it wasn't sustainable, and it frustrated me that people were drawn into the market who were maybe there for the wrong reason, i.e. speculation and trying to make a buck, as opposed to like true hardcore enthusiasts. I will be into these cars no matter what they cost, whether they are deeply depreciated and basically free or wildly expensive. My value and enjoyment of these cars doesn't change, but it annoys me when people get drawn into the space and drive prices up who are not into the cars for the same reason, who are clout chasing because it's magenta or whatever the heck things are going on that are sort of peripheral. And I mean, even that's a form of enthusiasm about the car itself, as opposed to treating it as an investment.
That's where I agree with you.
Yeah. So
nothing wrong with it, for the record, but just not.
Well, it's annoying, or it's a lack of justice, I suppose, that the people who get true, like, unbridled value about the object itself are no longer able to participate because there are a bunch of people who are, I think, in my obviously non-objective value assessment, perverting the value of the car because they're engaging with it for the wrong reasons, for reasons that aren't intrinsic to their enthusiasm for cars generally. And I think that's regrettable and disappointing, especially for all the enthusiasts who
can't afford them,
who would get so much value out of having that car but can't because of, but that is the nature of wealth and its distribution not being equal, and it exists in every object, not just cars. Anyway. So the market is doing a lot of weird stuff right now as a result of that, but generally fairly soft. I think it's a good buyer's market, but if you have something really extraordinary, you can still hit a home run. But generally speaking, for commodity cars, and commodity just means, could you find another one like it? A Ferrari Testarossa, if it's red with 20,000 miles, is a commodity car because they made 7,000 Testarossas and most of them were red. If it's a 200-mile blue one that has never been titled, then it's harder to repeat and it'll do a stupid number, even if it's a car they made a comparatively large quantity of. Or, and it happens like your Scirocco would do this because it's a car that there's repeatability. How would you find another one? And so this happens at all value points and all genres of cars. It just has to be unrepeatable. And this is one of the things that I always talk to people about like, should I buy this one or let it go? Or, what should I do here? I always say, how important is this particular car? There's this term that is used in negotiation where it's called BATNA, Best Alternative to Negotiated Agreement. The BATNA is your walk away. What are you left with if you walk away from a deal? And negotiated agreement there means like, yes, you do the transaction. So, what is your BATNA? Are you willing to walk away is what that actually means. If the car is so special, so unrepeatable, so magical in some way that's really important to you, and your BATNA is like, oh, I'm not really willing to walk away because I would just be the one that got away for the rest of my life, and I'd rather have this car than live with a life of regret saying, man, I let that one get away. And you have to, as a consumer, ask yourself, is this a car that I could... Somebody nearby must have indicated
Our lights in the background
lights
just got very bright.
To be full brightness. Signals just in
And
the
we're
ether.
back.
Okay. So you have to ask yourself, am I willing to would I live a life of regret about this one being the one that got away, or will another one that is similar turn up in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, or am I getting too old to enjoy this, and does the opportunity cost of not enjoying this car for the months or years that it takes to find one similar to it, like, not worth it to me? Or do I have this list of cars that I need to get through, and so, like, you have to make all of that calculus. But this is a way that I like to help people make decisions about, like, am I willing to walk away? Like, if it's a car that there's just obviously another one will come along in some point in the future, then you say, well, it has to be a good deal, or I just want it now and this one is here and it's really well maintained, or it's super well documented, or whatever the things are about it that make it unrepeatable.
Ticks the boxes, and
yes, that are important.
I'm not going to find
you.
another one, and then if the price just...
And the tough thing is having the information at the time to make that decision. And so many times I have concluded after the fact that a car was a one that got away, but I didn't have the intelligence or information or knowledge to know that in retrospect. Right. And being able to figure that out on the spot while you're making the decision is a acquired skill, talent, or takes some navel gazing and some self-awareness.
I think a lot of people never get there.
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
and a lot of people buy things out of convenience, and one person's buy thing out of convenience, and I just happen across this, is another person's like a holy grail, and that's all incredibly personal and subjective and specific to you as an individual and your priorities and values, and what you had on your wall as a kid, or what your dad or neighbor or uncle or best friend's dad drove when you were a child, or wherever all of these weird affinities that we develop for this or that color or whatever. As children. So, yeah, the market generally is...
I don't understand it. Because a month apart, so at the Amelia, there was that gorgeous white 850 CSI. It was a U.S. car. It, I think, had 34,000 miles on it, or 30-something. I probably should have looked this up before we recorded. But I know we included a picture in the past. I have a picture of it. The car was absolutely spectacular. It was lowered. It had dyno suspension on it and a couple mods. But it's a U.S. car, which I don't think makes it any less desirable, but it makes it registerable in California.
Yeah, and there's a lot of car people here, and so I would say this is true of Ferraris too, of this era, like 550s and stuff. A U.S. car is probably more valuable because there's fewer hoops to get it.
So here's a car that was just stunning, and it sold for... Do you remember what it sold for?
No, it was cheap though.
It was.
I remember
really
it was quite cheap.
I think estimate was a 110 to 150, and I think it sold for 60 or 80 or something. I mean, and then a few weeks later, you have a Euro car.
It's all
not
about
registerable and
well, yes, and this highlights another. I think this is a really great point to raise, and we see this happen all the time. There was, for example, a US 512 TR that was black with red interior with 10,000 miles, and it just sold like stupid cheap. And that, I mean, all of those cars are red, and so to find one that's black is like pretty cool, and people want black ones because Michael Jordan had one, and it's sinister and whatever. And usually they're black inside, or maybe crema or tan, but with a red interior is neat. So like a U.S. car, low miles, in a great color combination, should be like a home run, and it's sort of sold weekly for week, WEAK, or sold light for what it was. And this happens sometimes with physical in-person auctions, is that, there's only so many people in the room and a handful of people online, and every so often things can go through that are great deals. But, for every one of those, there's also one where you're like, wow, those guys were really drunk and it was a dick measuring contest and the car went insane, or this car is so extraordinary and special. And a lot of what auction companies do, the physical ones, is, especially for the big lots, is they try to make sure that there's a guy, or ideally more than one, who wants it at a number that'll get it sold, and they try to, as much in advance as possible, do the diligence to make sure that guy's in the room and figure out that he's willing and he's registered as a bidder, and that all his questions and hesitations are addressed in advance, and just eliminate as many barriers to transactions as possible. But they will really do that. The more expensive the car is, the more they're going to do that. And for some of the lighter or less expensive lots that go through, especially if they're no reserve, there's definitely potential for deals. And I saw a fair number of no reserve cars go through as deals, because there's just not. It's not like online where you can get it from anywhere in the world, and there's a more likely to be a huge audience. But it does happen occasionally on Bring a Trailer also, especially if it's some car that there's one every week, so you're just, I'm not paying super close attention. I'm not ready to buy this week. And then,
there'll be another one. Right?
There'll be another one that'll come along. So occasionally things will sell light. And there are potential for sure for deals, especially right now in today's market. And there's stuff where it's not rational. This is not like these are not interchangeable items completely the way the stock market is, where basically the price gets set by this huge signal of gigantic quantity of buyers and sellers, and so the transactions happen almost instantly. Like, you have to have the person, an individual in the room, versus or wherever the venue is, and so stuff that is not rationalizable, where you're like, this is a perfectly average car that sold strongly, or a perfectly excellent car that sold lightly. It just happens, and it's a sort of noise about who was there and paying attention at that time. Yep.
What strikes me about the strangeness of the market right now, so we have a couple weeks apart, we had two E31 CSIs, right? One sold for 3-4 times what the other one sold for. They should have been within a couple % of each other. One was a U.S. white car with black interior, and the other one was a Tobago blue car. But I don't think that's going to account for a 3 to 3.5x purchase price multiple. And then, so you think, wow, the market must be really, really, really strong. Then again on BAT, 2 weeks ago, 87 Mercedes 2.316 Euro car, 109,000 kilometers, 68,000 miles. Somebody stole this car for $39,000.
Yeah. There was another one in France that sold really lightly. That was a very nice car that subsequently got imported to the United States that happened with too. And for these cars on Bring a Trailer, especially the lighter, the less expensive cars, import is a much more substantial portion of the car's value. Right. And so you see hesitance for people to import cars that are less expensive because they're factoring in the fact that by the time it gets here, it's probably $10,000, call it, to get the car here.
Well, and now you add
for 30 or 40,000. Yeah, it was historically $10,000 to get the car here, and now that number goes a lot higher.
Goes up by 25% of the purchase price of the car.
Yeah, 22.5 technically. Yeah. Whereas with more expensive cars, so there's a reluctance to import because people don't understand the process, because there is some complexity to it, although it's not as complex as people think.
It's not as complex as you think, but it is also scary, right? I don't have the idea. We should do an episode in the next couple on PPIs, right?
Yeah.
The value of that. We've had a couple of really great reminders recently.
Yes.
But
diligence.
How do you go get someone to look at this car, or can you get yourself over there to physically look at the car in person? And for a $5,000 car and $8,000, I think that sold at auction in the twos, right? This $2,000 car. Yeah. No one is going to Japan.
And at that point, you're like, well, worst comes to worst, it's $2,000 I've thrown away, but I probably haven't done that. But hopefully that's not what happened. But it could have happened, and your loss is capped at some number. Whereas as cars get more expensive, there's this sort of uncomfortable medium. When the car's very expensive, then it's worth the trouble to spend whatever it takes to go diligence the car, which is what I did. I flew to England to evaluate this car, which is now being air freighted here. Like, that's worth doing. It's easy to rationalize it when you're spending, or someone is spending that kind of money. Yeah. And when it's a $2,000 car, you're like,
whatever.
Well, we'll find out.
What's the worst import that you've done, or the cheapest car that you've imported?
20-something thousand probably. Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to think if I've brought in. Oh, no. My 116. My 116 was around 10.
Okay. So mine was my E30. I mean, I paid $1,500 for my E30.
Which is why you rode it.
Well, yeah. It was €1,500, which at the time was $1,500. Like, what if it gets scratched? know, like it came pre-scratched. I don't have to worry about that. But buying a car over there, it's a scary sort of proposition to buy something that you can't see. I mean, I did see both of those cars in person.
Well, and you also hope that when you send the money that it's not going to just disappear and you're never going to hear anything again also. So that's another risk.
There. Everyone got cash for me when I did it for that reason. But
there's definitely
also scary.
many ways to think about importing cars.
Well, that's why you go to a
many ways
broker.
to do it.
That's why you have a job.
I mean, and you just know the right people saying, like, when I brought my purple wagon over, like, there was no business like case for doing that. That was done purely out of passion. But I knew somebody who was on the ground there, and I said, "Can you just like evaluate this thing for me? Because I want this so badly that it was one of those getaway. There was one of those I knew I was going to kick myself forever if I let it get away.
I will kick you forever if you ever sell that car.
Oh, really?
Oh.
So I shouldn't be thinking about it?
Are you thinking about selling it?
I have thought about it.
No. It's a dogleg slick top.
I know.
3.6 liter.
It's just, there was an AMG, an actual AMG built car as opposed to my car, which, Matt Quick built. That was a manual AMG car with the body kit and everything that sold in Florida for like over $100,000. And I was like, I know that my car will not sell for that much, but I do think the car could sell for some number where I'm like, oh, that's leaves a lot of change left over to buy.
This is where you and I are so different. I mean, if I look at the amount of cars that I bought for under $5,000, right?
Yeah.
$1,500 for the Scirocco, $1,500 for the 2316, $2,200 for the Cabby, like all down the line. Those cars are now worth many, 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 many multiples of what. It doesn't matter to me. What I like about them being worth more money is that then people are incentivized to sell parts for them to me.
Sure.
The parts prices go up, everything goes up, the insurance premium goes up, all of that happens. Yeah. But that just means it's easier for me to keep them. Mm-hmm. You do it the other way around where you're like, oh, it's worth 10x what I paid for it. It has to go. I'm happy. Oh, it's worth 10x? Yes.
I mean, I am happy too, but for different reasons. Well, it's not, I mean, it's just like you think about the opportunity cost of the money, I guess, is when it becomes valuable enough, I think about the opportunity cost of the money.
Yeah, I don't.
Like, what else could you do with that money?
I guess I have thought about that. I mean, I did sell the Lotus.
Yeah.
And now having a roof on my house.
Exactly.
I'm getting solar. Yay, being an adult. Yay. But I don't, I think I get too emotionally attached to cars.
Yes, I don't really get emotionally attached to cars. I'm just thinking if that's true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about this about a couple weeks ago and you said no. And I thought.
Yeah, I don't really. If it's something really hard to replace, I get attached to it just because it's hard to replace, not because I'm attached to the object itself.
This is my problem with the Rover.
Yeah.
Because the Rover I should have already sold, right? Yeah. We had our fun. We did this stupid road trip. The three of us went and bought the car together, and we get it home, and you two were like, all right, if we ever see it again, yay. If not, whatever. Yeah. And I'm like, well, I'll buy you out. And now I have it. And I've thought a couple times about selling it. And then I thought, I'm never going to see another one.
That has to be okay if you get to see some other thing instead.
But this whole thing started because I mentioned on the podcast that it had been 30 years since I'd seen one. And so now here's my opportunity not to see one, to own one. And then I have it, and it's pretty, and it sits there and it leaks such a lovely amount of oil. And
which is quite light, I think, for one of those cars.
Yeah, it's getting worse.
Lovely.
I think.
Well, I guess you should pull the engine out of it and address that. We can discuss that.
That's
anon.
Happening. That's totally happening. Yeah, it needs to have an oil. It's got an oil leak. Time to pull the motor. I mean, it could use a reseal. It could also use twice as much horsepower. But again, the problem,
while we're in there,
it could also use
scope creep,
7,000 RPM, like roller rocker. Anyway, no, the problem is that I just know I'll never be able to replace that car. Period. Find me another. I didn't know the car came in that color. Like, I wasn't sort of aware of it. And I think this Rover is perhaps maybe a little bit more saturated of a blue than it was originally supposed to be. I think, like, what am I going to get? Like a gold one or yellow one? I don't like them in any other color, really. And find me a U.S. car or a North American car that I can actually register in California. That's a whole nother discussion, this whole Leno's Law thing. I'm sure you've heard of this.
Of course.
For everyone outside who of this room who hasn't heard about it, there is pending legislation in California that's on the books that will come to a head on whether 35-year-old and older classic cars will be exempt from smog.
Emissions checking.
Biennial. So you'll still have to smog the car when you buy it, but then every 2 years.
You have to do it once when you buy it?
Once well, that's a separate law, so I don't think that counts here. But the sort of every 2 year smog requirement is a pretty big problem for a lot of classic car owners, and that's in California from 1976 through 1995, because now in 1996 and later cars are just an OBD2 plug-in scan, and so it just becomes that's just a lot less complicated to do. And what happens is, we should do a whole episode on this. What happens is that the 76 through 95 cars need to be put on a dyno, and the amount of cars on the road that now are subject to dyno tests is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking.
And so the businesses don't want to continue to maintain and own a dyno, and so you have fewer and fewer options, and the price of emissions checks on those cars is like insanely high.
It's getting to the point where it's untenable. And so here's another sort of, I would say, government overreach, but other people might phrase it differently. There's another government plan that's basically effectively making our lives as collectors more difficult. In the state of California's example, it's hurting California's revenue, because everyone's solution is just register it in a state outside of California and give the middle finger to California. And so a law was written, Congresswoman, I think she is. The person whose team wrote the law presented it to Jay Leno. Jay was interested in it. He's helping push the word out for it. So now they're nicknaming it Leno's Law. It did have some requirement for collector car insurance. I was asked to help on the whole thing, and I revved up my law degree, and I pointed out that there is no such thing as a collector car insurance policy. And requiring that would then require defining what's the legal definition of a collector car insurance policy. And that is now opening this whole thing up to years of arguing about, does that mean it has to be housed in a garage? Does that mean you have a mileage restriction? And it will never go through. So I've pushed back and asked for them to revise this is SB 712, revise the text to not require classic car insurance, but to require classic car registration, i.e. historical vehicle plate, which is then outwardly visible to law enforcement. So that stops the argument that says, well, what's to stop Derek, the gardener, from registering his 1989 Silverado work truck with classic car insurance on it, and then not having to smog it, and then driving 40,000 miles a year with no catalytic converter, right? So if it has historical vehicle plates on it, well, then the cops can see it right away. And hey, Derek, this is the third time this week you've driven by at 5:30 in the morning with a lot of lawnmowers in the back of your Silverado. Perhaps you should get that plate off of your truck. Mm-hmm. So what I've heard is that there will be a point at which we set up sort of automated mailing systems for representatives, and probably a petition and whatever else to help push this through. But California is a really difficult state to own old cars in, to begin with, and not getting any easier.
Yeah, we can discuss this at length for sure.
I think we should. I'm waiting for the revised text on that, but Leno's great for participating in this. And of course, he's got 180 cars or whatever it is, and I'm sure can you imagine that? That's a car every 4 days is due for smog. I can't do that math. If every car is every 2 years, and there's 200, that's 90 cars. Yeah, that's 90 cars a year he would have to smog, if they were all over past 1970, 75. Anyway,
most of them probably are not.
Yeah, but still, I mean, for me, when I had 12 cars, it was one a month or one every 2 months.
Yeah,
which is a lot. It's a lot of stress.
Yeah,
and it's not the passing the test. It's not it's not the cost. It's the, oh no, what did I miss this time? What is this moron in a smog suit going to find and say, that's not the correct vacuum hose, and you can't use that. And this is supposed to have a third catalytic converter. No, it's not. There's that level of stupidity.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah. I've been there.
Yeah. Sure.
All Californians have.
All Californians have. But more importantly, huge amount of uncertainty and volatility in the car market, which I don't like.
Yeah, it's quite inconsistent, because directly affected by the performance of the stock market, and so some buyers are just not in the room at the moment because they're like, oh my gosh, I'm ruined, and so those people aren't there, and so some stuff goes down and is light. Other people are still playing because it doesn't affect them as much for how they've structured their wealth, and it's just. But the ultimate number of people buying and transacting cars has gone down, and so the numbers of values are going down generally. And I also have noticed that it's very pronounced in the sort of segment of cars that went up very rapidly, which we'll call, in Europe they call them young timers, which are sort of last 20 years or so of cars. Stuff like Range Rover L322s and really extraordinary BMW 7 Series for E38s, or this stuff that transitioned from being $7,500 Craigslist cars into being like, holy shit, one of those sold for $25,000 on Bring a Trailer in 2022, and then they're kind of slipping back into the sort of like, oh, we're back in Facebook Marketplace Craigslist territory, like, because those cars were the last to go up, and they were being driven by people who. The value increases were being driven by people who were sort of, able to buy them relatively recently, all simultaneously driving the prices up for nice ones. And so those cars are slipping, I think, the most against stuff like air-cooled 911s are expensive and they're desired by enough people that they're not doing as much of that.
Stuff, what was it recently that E46 M3s or E39 M5s, so worth half of what they were a year ago. There's some stuff that I just don't understand.
Yeah.
To me, that
those are those types of cars that have gotten sort of dragged out, that got briefly, momentarily, temporarily dragged off of Facebook Marketplace and into Bring a Trailer bidding wars, and now enough of those people are gone for various economic reasons or whatever. Or because they're distracted now by all the things that they used to do before the values of those cars went up because it's not the pandemic anymore, or whatever the reason is. There's fewer people out there driving the values of those cars. But
I think that's resulted in a huge buying opportunity to make money for somebody, right? I mean, a $25,000 E39 M5 for a really, really, really nice one at this point is a steal.
Yeah,
steal,
and
that should be twice that.
Those cars are desired by enough people, and good ones will be hard enough to find in the future that that's a bet I would make. I wouldn't necessarily do it with a car that doesn't have really inarguable enthusiast appeal. Some stuff that got kind of really crazy valuable, then there aren't enough. There's not an enthusiastic enough car to really justify that, and that's where I would get apprehensive. An E39 M5 as being what it is, I think is a safer place to make that. M cars generally, naturally aspirated manual M cars, I think it's a safe place to do that. But I would be less sure about W12 Phaetons or slightly more esoteric stuff where you're like, are there going to be enough sedans? Generally, it's a little especially non-sporting sedans. I would be more concerned about doing that with.
Fair point.
So it depends what it is. Anyway, interesting times for sure. The tariff adventure is going to be a big one for those who do a lot of import business. I mean, I think
come as a surprise to a lot of people who probably don't realize that.
That the market is going to change domestically as a result of that. But I mean, I think we did $7 million of imports so far, and so it'll definitely change the landscape for us. A lot of our big deals are import deals. That's the talent of finding stuff in weird places that people here want but don't know how to get in is kind of our deal. So should be quite inconvenient for us, but adapt, improvise, overcome.
Right. Inconvenient for you guys, expensive for your customers.
Well, they're just going to stop bringing them in. We'll have to find them domestically. I mean, I just can't imagine my customers being willing to spend an additional $700 or million or whatever dollars, multi-millions of dollars of additional duty.
I guess it just gets eventually priced into the
correct.
market.
The cars that are here will become more expensive, but
probably not by 25%.
Yeah, I mean that's what they would have. They'd have to be 25% more expensive here, 22.5% more expensive here than they are in Europe, for example, in order for someone to say, well, I would rather buy that one in Europe and pay the 25% duty to get it here than any of the candidates that are here, because I really want the car that raced at Le Mans in 1964 or whatever.
Unsettling times.
Yes, good times to be a car person. Just kidding.
Or you could just sue Volkswagen.
Sure, why not both? Anyway, thank you for joining us of this episode of the Carmudgeon Show, where we covered a wide variety of topics, all of them uplifting, none of them uplifting.
Not
this
a single
week.
one.
Okay, well, maybe we'll do better next week.
We'll try.
Okay.
Probably not. Remember the
Carmudgeon Show, exactly. Right? It's not the...
We're supposed to be complaining about
Sunshine
everything.
and Rainbow Automotive Podcast.
It's raining
Society
outside.
or whatever.
I don't know if you can hear that. So, well, why should we be sunny when it's raining outside?
That's right. Okay. Thank
In
you.
fact, I hear water dripping over there occasionally, so I think it's raining in here too. See?
We generated
Shit
our
keeps
own
getting-
storm clouds.
It keeps getting rainier and stormier here on the Carmudgeon Show. Join us next week, please.
Alrighty.